Good morning, Michael. How are you?
Good. Well, you pulled me in first this time.
I know. Well, I'm trying to be respectful.
Respect. I was just thinking maybe it was Ace before Beauty this time.
What before beauty?
Ace before Beauty.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm not even talking to you anymore. But in all seriousness, I mean, we just decided Matt Failing is with us today. He has got such a great presentation for you that we were afraid if we let me keep talking that we wouldn't get through Matt's presentation. So we're going to go ahead and dispense with the niceties and bring Mr. Failing in this morning. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing great. Jenny, how are you doing?
I think I'm doing okay. No, I am. I'm just
How's
teasing.
it feel to be an ace?
Yeah, I know. What is that? What even is that, Michael?
No, I'm the Ace. I'm the Ace.
I know.
You were the
Oh
Okay.
no,
Hey,
he's the ace.
Oh,
God,
he's the
I don't
ace.
even.
Ah,
Yes,
okay.
he thinks he's the ace, whatever
Wow.
that is.
All right. Keeping it humble over there. I see.
Well, and that's a great way to sprint off into what we were going to talk about today.
It is. So
I contacted you because our mutual friend Sherry Conley said because I wanted to do a show. Michael and I wanted to do a show about ethics, and she said, "Well, you need to call my friend Matt Failing and talk to him. Give us just a little bit of your background because I think it's really interesting. So, give us a little bit of your background, and then let's hear what you go into what you've got going on."
So I started with I graduated from Noble High School back in so I'm a local born bred Oklahoma guy. Although my family is from mostly from upstate New York, but my folks moved here back in the 70s and then decided to settle down and have me. So I've been here most of my life, and I went to I was a big music guy for most of the first part of my life, and I played as they lovingly say in the music world, I was a concussionist. Percussion,
I love that, actually.
Banging on drums all day, right?
Yeah.
Percussionist.
Joe Walsh had a song about that.
So I played everything from 4-mallet marimba to snare and bass and trap and timpani and everything, all the whole gamut of it, and went into music education where I taught in Oklahoma City public schools for a little while, and that was an exercise in futility. I saw very quickly how rough our public schools were, and decided I probably don't want to do this for the rest of my life, and looked at law school.
That's kind of a shame, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is because I love doing it. I love music. I love interacting with kids, and I think music is an important thing for kids to be involved in. It stimulates brain development in ways that nothing else can really. But that being said, it just and it wasn't the kids I was frustrated with. It was the lack of support. Yeah. But so I decided, hey, let's try law school. And it worked out pretty well.
Because I'm going to go from music teacher to law school.
I know. Yeah. Just sometimes you just, you get a calling and you just go, okay, let's do this. Yeah. It worked well for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed law school. It was definitely a very different world. It was, I went from do re mi to Supreme Court hearings and
right.
Excuse me, but anyway, so I took and passed the bar exam back in 2012, and I established my own law firm. I worked with several attorneys in the city for a while to sort of get established and learn the ropes, and here I am about a decade later practicing law and now teaching at Rose. I teach civil procedure to in the fall to paralegal students, and then I teach business law to business associate students. And so I think it's important for both of those very different groups to have different legal perspectives. And that's where some of this ethics that we're talking about today comes from. Some of these slides come from those classes, and what I share with those students. Part of being an attorney is having a code of ethics to live by. Attorneys are push ethics quite a lot, especially in our CLE, the continuing legal education courses that we are mandated to take every year. And some of that is we have to take ethics courses every year, and keep up with, what is considered ethical practice of law, which is, a very big can of worms, really. But here I am now talking to you. I missed a rather important step where back in 2016, I decided to try to run for a House, Sherry's seat before she did. And that's how I sort of got connected with Sherry. She's fantastic. I like Sherry. She's awesome. And she, I think she and I both have been influential on each other. She's changed my perspectives and I've changed hers because we talk to each other.
Wait, what? I'm sorry. What is that?
That's crazy. When I started this whole process, my background, both of my parents, my mom and dad, were both UAW members, and they worked for the General Motors plant.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Before it shut down.
Yes.
And my wife's dad also worked for the General Motor plant. So we have 3 General Motors workers in the family, UAW workers. And so, coming from that background, that strong middle class background, I thought, oh, we're Democrats, definitely. And then I started diving into the political world and found out that was not the case at all.
No, I've spoken to you. You're not a Democrat.
Yeah. And so I have several friends who are Democrats. I feel I have conversations with them, and we have vibrant disagreements, which I feel is healthy, because we learn from each other. I learn from them.
Yeah, and I'm going to stop you right there because that is the reason why I asked you to come on today. Sure. And if you recall in our original conversation, my frustration has been that what you've experienced is not the norm at all, because we don't seem to be able to have disagreements and not have some kind of a throwdown, or not hate one another, or go out and say crappy things about each other on Twitter, or what. I mean, it's gotten to the point where, in my personal opinion, it's gotten to the point where we don't talk to each other. We talk at each other mainly, and then we also talk past each other. Mm-hmm. And it's my belief, really, that part of this is tied up in a misunderstanding of ethics and how people don't understand that honesty solves a lot of these problems, and that even when we don't agree, so long as we have some understanding of ethics, that we can honestly communicate. And I'm not going to go off on Twitter and go, Matt Failing is a blah, 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 and his blah, 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 right?
Well, if you do, it's fine by me, but
but I don't want us to. I want us to be able to talk. And
well, some of that, the reason I say that is some of that is we have to some extent, let that go a little bit when people do that, and see it for what it is. And unfortunate venting of frustration, and social media, like you said, Twitter, these sort of spaces tend to be echo chambers, and that's a lot of the problem, right? We tend to talk to people who only agree with what we agree with, and that's problematic, because what that does is it gives us a diluted sense of what the world really looks like out there, because when you're walking down the street, you're not going to just find people who agree with you.
Who are your
We have
Facebook
to-
friends?
Or your Facebook friends, exactly. We have to live in this world together and figure out a mutually beneficial path forward for all of us. And our founding fathers figured that out 200 and some odd years ago, how to do that. And it's called liberty, right? And so what that means, the great idea of America is that we are this huge melting pot or mixing pot, right, of ideas, and we can put it all together, and we can coexist and peacefully, and there's enough room in this world for all of us is kind of the idea, right? And so, but it seems lately that there's this pervasive mentality of trying to champion your ideas onto others, rather than just living them, right? And so I think if we all just live our ideas and be them and become them, rather than trying to force others to be them, we get to this point where we can all kind of just relax and be ourselves and accept each other for who we are,
Well, why don't you
But
start your
easier said than done,
presentation?
right?
Because I am dying
Sure,
to
okay.
hear all of this, because it's really a fascinating. I looked through your slides and they're fascinating.
Okay, sure. Well, we can dive into it here. So let me try to do a share screen without the echo of
And if it
The
doesn't
echo
work,
of-
I'll just pull the slides up.
doom here.
Echo of doom.
The echo of doom. Here we go. Let me try.
It is kind of actually. It's a little disconcerting. It's like Alice in Wonderland.
It
All right, do I
is.
need to pull them in? I think I do.
Are you guys seeing my slide
Yes.
now?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. Okay.
Okay.
So this is kind of what I use in some of my classes, a little bit for a presentation. So what do ethics have to do with anything, or how to be a good human in a corrupt world, right? It's hard, right? But it is possible. So one of the first things I talk about with my business students is business ethics. And we sort of start with a definition of what ethics is. It's simply a branch of philosophy dealing with values that relate to the nature of human conduct. Okay, so law and ethics are almost intrinsically the same thing, except that law is more of a consequence for not following expected ethics, whereas ethics themselves are more of the hypothetical type level of problem solving. And ethics and morals are different, and I want to make sure that people understand that difference, because a lot of times these two terms get thrown around interchangeably and they're not the same thing. And so I want to make sure that everyone understands that ethics are specifically values created by society or a group of people, that in that group of people says this is the standard of what is expected out of behavior within the group. Okay, that's ethics. Morals, on the other hand, are so they're societal decisions. Morals, on the other hand, are more self-determinative. Okay, from family, education, religion, or personal beliefs. Okay, if I believe it is wrong to eat meat on a Friday, okay, that's more of a moral. It's more of a moral conviction than an ethical one. Okay. Now, if we all get together and say we all agree that we should not eat meat on a Friday, then it becomes an ethical value. It goes from a moral value to an ethical one. Okay. So I just want to make that distinction there, because a lot of people misunderstand that. So in the business
Well, so let
world,
me ask you. Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So you mentioned our founding fathers at first. And one quote that I love from John Adams was basically that the Constitution was made for a wholly moral people. It's completely inadequate to the governance of any other. And so my thought process has always been, the Constitution doesn't work unless we can control ourselves. I mean,
Right.
personally. So we have our own set of morals. We're not relying on societal ethics. We're
Right.
relying on our own morals to go, well, I'm not going to steal from that person while he's not looking, or stick my hand in the till at my business. So,
Right.
I mean, do you kind of, is that
I
kind of right? Or you,
No, I definitely agree with that. And, a democracy requires not just an ethical people, but also an intelligent ethical people, because governance, which is essentially what democratic republic is, right, which is what we have, requires the people who run the government, us, to be engaged, to be intelligent, and to be ethical, right? In order for it to work. If we aren't those things, it doesn't work. And so, you can't have a society where society is built on trust above all other things, right? We can't have a business relationship or business dealings. We can't have personal relationships or personal dealings without trust, right? And so ethics, at fundamentally the reason for ethics and the bottom line is we have to be able to trust each other to have a society. Wow. And I think that's kind of maybe what our founding father Adams is saying there is the foundation of the Constitution is built on the fact that we all are a tight-knit community that trusts each other. And that has, over time, as we've grown, and America is in many ways a victim of its own success, right? And so, as we've grown and as we've evolved as a people and technological advancements and working out how to deal with those and how to use them ethically. And one of the newest ethical debates, of course, is going to be artificial intelligence and how to use that ethically, right? And that's a whole other topic, maybe for another time. But ethics is a pervasive theme throughout all of human history that comes in at every level, from personal morals to expected societal conduct, and how to use everything from technology to money to law, all of it, right? So specifically here, talking about business ethics is sort of the balancing of the goal of profit with the values of individuals and society. And so in business, we have this, the point of business is to make money, right? Does a business have a responsibility to make its shareholders ridiculously rich, or does it also have some sort of social responsibility to society, to prevent society from breaking, or at the very least to make sure that its products are safe and are not doing harm at the expense of making money.
We're not making baby cribs and churning them out that are going to fall down on kids. And
exactly, right. And so we have this sort of the fundamental ethical issues in business is balancing the goal of making profits with the responsibility of protecting society at large from harm, from whatever is being sold out there, right? And so we have this idea of positive law, which is law enacted and codified by governmental authority. And an example of this is sort of the as is or buyer beware doctrine, which, if you purchase a car, positive law says that it's as long as you use the phrase as is somewhere in the contract, if the car falls apart the next day, then it's the buyer's problem. Even though this inherently doesn't feel right or fair to people, if you go out and you buy a car, you have at least some sort of expectation that it's going to work for a little while before it falls apart. However, the idea behind this is that the duty is on the buyer to inspect the vehicle before the purchase and not on the seller to make it right. And this doesn't sit well with a lot of people, but in the law, we don't deal with conscience so much as we deal in contracts and performance of duties, and who has the duty. And here it's on the buyer. The buyer should have inspected the vehicle, failed to do so, and therefore it's the buyer that's left holding the short end of the stick.
Well, and I want to actually even say something at this point too, because
Sure.
what you're talking about to me was the beginning of what we're seeing right now, which is I'm too lazy to do anything for myself. So I need to have law or government do it for me.
Step in, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's kind of what, the law has to constantly balance multiple different rights, right? That's why the scales of justice, right? That's what represents the law. And it's a great representation, because there's always this balancing between a buyer and a seller, and somebody that makes a product, somebody that uses the product, right? And so ethically, ethics in the business world, or just in general, are kind of the same thing. They're a weighing of individual rights and duties and responsibilities. And so in this instance, the law steps in with lemon laws. That's the big solution in a situation like this. Now lemon laws apply to new vehicles only, but
right.
And we have this 4 attempt rule where it says, you buy a brand new vehicle, you expect it to work. There's an expectation that, when you spend that kind of money, you're going to get a value for that money. That's the ethics behind that, right? And so then, but there has to also be an opportunity to fix the problem. So we have this 4 attempt rule. They have 4 chances to try to correct the defect. If on the 4th chance it still does not get corrected, then they must replace the vehicle completely and outright. Okay.
And it's so funny that you bring that one up, because I actually had a Volkswagen Rabbit, and this was, in the early 80s, and when they first came out, and I got one. And that sucker was a nightmare. I mean, it would just stop. It was a horrible thing. But that was before we had lemon laws.
Right.
Excuse me. And I'll tell you, trying to get that dealership to do anything about that car was almost impossible. And it's sad to me that you have to create a law, because I can't just go, look, the thing's broken down 3 times now. It's not even a year old. I have to keep repairing it or bringing it back. Something's the matter. And then the people go, oh my gosh, Jenny, I'm so sorry about that. That is a problem. Let's see what we can do. But then they won't do that. So you have to create a law.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, and I'll talk to that. I talked about laissez-faire markets.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of people like to champion the idea of laissez-faire, which is, just leave the market alone and it'll regulate itself. But in practicality, what happens to people is your experience there, is we have people that enter the market and just, with basically their entire goal is to make profits at any cost, right? And not stand behind their product, or not, and so that's where the entire body of law that deals with warranties and contractual provisions and warranties and things of that nature, breaches of contract. That whole body of law is based off of basically this problem in business ethics of profits versus quality of product. And I don't know if you guys have noticed lately or not, but we have this concept now of planned obsolescence in a lot of the products that people make.
Can anybody say iPhone?
Yeah, absolutely. Or even your refrigerator, your washing machine, your microwave, your stove, all of it these days, your vehicle, your house, right? The way that we build things is constantly getting cheaper, which means things break quicker. We're using plastic parts instead of metal parts. We're using, the thinnest material possible to continue, to produce a product that works, but only for a limited amount of time. Because, if I'm if I'm a company and I make washing machines, I want you buying a new washing machine every 3 to 5 years. I don't want you buying one every 50 years. That doesn't help my bottom line, right? And so we have this, again, this ethical dilemma of what responsibility do we have to make a product that is reasonable and reliable for the consumer, while still balancing the goal of creating profits for the business. And so, we could certainly dive into that more, but but I feel, one of the main things about answer the question of whether something is ethical is to first ask whether it's legal, because the law usually, but not always, of course, usually falls on the side of doing what is right, or at least makes a good faith attempt at doing so. Okay? If something's illegal, it's most likely because it's considered unethical. It's why we have a law in the first place. Somebody complained, this isn't fair. And so that's why we have a law, like you said, with the car example you gave. That's perfect. 2008, you guys probably remember this. The subprime mortgage financial collapse was due to an ethical dilemma, because there was a lack of regulation in the market. And when there's a lack of regulation, and I'm not championing regulation, because there is also a balancing here. Too much regulation prevents the market from being able to function as well. So again, it's a balance, right? But a lack of regulation also creates a higher chance of unethical conduct in order to gain a competitive edge. So banks were selling worthless loans, causing high foreclosure rates. The SEC and the Federal Reserve had to step in and say, guys, you're gonna tank our economy. You can't do this. The Federal Reserve, which is now known as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, exists to help regulate ethics in business relationships. Better Business Bureau, which is not a government entity, but a private entity, but they help monitor ethical business conduct. And I will say also, online reviews have done have been very influential in sort of ethical business conduct. What's the first thing people do when they're buying online? They look at the reviews, right? And so their internet and reviews have been very influential with helping people regulate, what companies are trustworthy and which ones aren't. And then, ethical traps that you look at in business: self-dealing, nepotism, double dipping, price gouging, insider trading, tax evasion, fraud, breach of contract, breach of warranty, pyramid schemes. You guys remember Bernie Madoff and that whole situation, right? So,
well, there were several of them there that actually described unethical governmental practices as well, which I'm hoping we're going to be able to get to, since that's my.
Yes, exactly. So I'm gonna skip through some of this for time purposes, because this is talking about antitrust laws and things like that. And you said you were going to try to make this slide available for anyone.
I am. No, I'm going to make the whole presentation. I'll download it on PDF and put it up and just put it on the website with a link to the video. And I'll also put it underneath. I'll also put it underneath the videos on Rumble and YouTube in there in the description.
Great. Awesome. Great. So, so this is, so anyone that's interested in antitrust laws can look into these: the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, Robinson-Patman Act. These are, again, just laws that help, help deal with some of these ethical issues in business regulation.
But that basically were put into place because people can't play nice with other people.
Well, right, exactly, and again, it always goes back to balancing, doing what's ethical. This one in particular, Amazon, and I'm not picking on Amazon here, but Amazon for a while was selling books and ebooks while also owning the publishing companies and recruiting authors, while holding shipments of non-Amazon author books in order to affect the sales and encourage more authors to sign with Amazon Publishing. And so Amazon was basically holding the entire market hostage and saying, if you want to get a book out there, you go through us, you publish with us, or else. And so it was a Clayton Act violation, and they had to stop doing it. But The point here is companies will do unethical things to in the interest of money, because it's human nature to do so. And so
Because the
these things,
love of money is
the
the
love of
root of all evil.
There we go.
exactly. Yep, that's exactly
It's
right.
not
And
money, and people get that mixed up. It's not money is the root of all evil. That's
it's
not
the
what was
love,
said. It is the
yep,
love of
of money.
money. You can
Yep.
have money. You can have gazillions of dollars, but you
Hmm.
can't love it so much that that's all you want, and you deal unethically and poorly with your neighbor and the poor.
Exactly.
I'll just channel Jesus there.
And become you're absolutely right. And you can't money itself it cannot be the goal of life, because money is a means to an end, not an end. And I think a lot of folks don't realize that. But a lot of people have this sort of idea of, if only I had more money, I would be happy. But I see a lot of people with plenty of money that are miserable. And so, there's this sense of money equates to happiness. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. In fact,
Well,
I
and
would
this,
argue that being an ethical person and living an ethical life is what will lead you to happiness a lot quicker than money,
yeah.
So
Well, I
go
think,
ahead.
unfortunately, that's kind of a lot of the philosophy of the Western world, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that was the great thing about America originally, was that we
Right.
had, this great open economic system, and we were kind of, you know, liberal and letting people do what they wanted. But then the problem was, people couldn't behave.
Right.
So, I do kind of a little bit blame the kind of Western ideal of, I want to keep up with the Joneses for a lot of this, just
Sure.
kind of permeating our culture.
Yeah.
And I will say too, the lack of teaching ethics, and the fact that we don't like Christianity anymore, and don't want to listen to what Jesus said. So that's, I
Absolutely.
think, a whole big blob of
And
reasons
and you're
why
talking
we're,
and you're talking about a topic that we'll get to in a second, which is
yeah.
the problem with between moral relativism and absolute absolute morality, and I want to talk about that. So let me to skip ahead. Let me just look at some of these examples here, and we can be done with this at end of things topic. So modern examples of ethical problems. Social media's business model of selling people's personal information to other businesses for profit. Okay, I mean, you could look at this and say, how dare you sell my personal information to another business and get rich off of it, right? Who do you think you are? Well, unfortunately, when you click that button and sign up for Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you're agreeing to give them the license of your personal information over to them. And one of the problems here is that we don't have any ability to really negotiate these contracts. I mean, when you go buy a car, you can at least negotiate the price a little bit, and you can negotiate what kind of vehicle you want, what color you want it in, right? Things like that. When you sign up for social media or any of these online products, you have to click an end user license agreement, right? An EULA. And you have zero ability to negotiate with it. You either agree and you use our product, or you don't agree and you can't use our product. So is that excuse me, so is that ethical to basically just tell people, we're not going to negotiate contract terms with you? You either agree to give us your personal information, or you can no longer use our product. So that's a whole bag of worms there. Google search engines excluding competitors who don't pay premium pricing to them. I mean, this is behavior that the mafia used to do, right? Blocking out competitors and using your money and power and authority to do that kind of thing. Nike using third world country labor to make products at low cost and then bringing them back to America and selling them at really high prices. You know, an ethically questionable practice for sure. Hiring family members, nepotism over, you know, third-party independent contractors, especially while using government funds. And Oklahoma, I'm sorry, and even conservatives in Oklahoma, I'm sorry to say, have a big problem with this one sometimes.
Yes.
You know, it's like, oh, well, we're going to rebuild this road. Okay, well, you know, it's supposed to be.
But my cousin Joe that has a asphalt company.
Yep. That's exactly right. Yep. My cousin Joe has his asphalt company, and we're going to just, you know, we're going to use his company, even though it's a blind bid. Well, I'll just tell Joe what he needs to bid to win the bid. And then we'll, you know, that kind of nonsense goes on just absolutely way too much, way too much. Which of course breeds the question, how do you stop it from happening? And I think, you know, we the people being more involved in and asking questions about things like, you know, why is this company being chosen to do this construction job? And are they really the best company to be doing the job, or are there some ties here that need some explanation? Maybe they really are the best company that came in at the lowest price. That can entirely be possible. Sometimes nepotism isn't the goal, but an inadvertent side effect. However, that's pretty rare. Usually, if there's there should be some sort of disclosures at the very least of if if somebody in government is hiring a company and they know the owner of the company, they're friends with them, or they're related to them somehow, they need to there needs to be some sort of mandatory disclosure about that. And then there needs to be maybe a hearing or a meeting that talks about whether or not it's still in the best interest to continue moving forward, despite the fact that there's this apparent conflict of interest, right? So, and we've got business models that require buy-ins, recruitments, things like MLM, multi-level marketing, Ponzi schemes. And these are different things. Multi-level marketing is legal. Ponzi schemes are illegal, but they are very close to each other in structure. So, you know, I don't want to get into that too heavily, but you want to be careful dealing with some of those MLM companies, and make sure that they're not in fact Ponzi schemes that are marketing themselves as MLM, because there's a few of those out there. Amazon, we talked about buying out market competition before it gets large enough to have a competitive edge. Pharmacy companies charging different prices for prescriptions based on insurance or out-of-pocket costs. You know, we have this issue. Walmart came out with their $12 prescription plan or whatever it was, and CVS, Walgreens, some of these other companies, in order to compete with that, if you came in and said, I've got an out-of-pocket cash pay for a prescription, they would sell it to you the same price as Walmart. But if you had insurance, they would turn around and sell it to you at insurance cost for $120. Where if it was cash pay, it would be $12. Well, what does that do to your insurance premiums? So those types of practices, charging different prices to different people, turning away customers with little capital, or implementing policies that only attract high-end clients, right? All of these things. But okay, so I do briefly want to just share a couple websites as well that are great resources for folks to help with some of these ethical issues. The main website for the U.S. government is USA.gov. It's a great resource, a great website. But there's one thing I do want to point out about this website that I'm not fond of, because this is the front page of our government, right? Let me see if it'll let me pull this up. And do you notice, what's the first thing that you notice on this website?
A lot of people that are not American.
Exactly right. Yeah. So, USA.gov, our main website, is clearly geared towards, diversity and inclusion, right, is the first thing that kind of comes to mind when you see a picture like this. Oh, and possibly illegal immigrants. So it's geared towards, hey, come to America, right? And then
to get your government services, because we'll give you whatever you want.
To get what?
Benefits.
Your benefits, right? And then over here, way over at the end, we talk about scams and fraud, taxes and travel. So clearly, even the way that our website is structured, we see some of the inherent problems that's going on. Topics and services, come get your services here. Let's tell you about the government. Come get your benefits, right? The U.S. government is not a service organization, right?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The U.S. government is not a service organization, right?
Matt, doesn't it all go back to the government in the first place? They're the ones that are unethical. They're the ones where the regulators fail over and over again. We have all these laws, we have all these policies, we have all these regulations, yet the government is who allows these companies to use child labor to bring these products in. The government allows these bankers to create these bad products. There's no repercussion. And even like with my own experience with like parents in the local school system, there's obscure laws on the books that only allow a parent to even sue a school district for a certain amount of money. There's no real repercussion for parents, or just people in general. I think people always want to do the right thing. I mean, I always go back to saying, one of the things that's overlooked in our country that makes us, or that made us so great, yes, we have freedom. We're the light, we're shining light on the hill. But ultimately, we were the most ethical country probably ever.
Absolutely. And not that long ago.
Yeah. I mean, and we would go and help, and we would fight in wars, and we would give the land back over. I mean, no one else did that through time. No. I mean, you conquer someplace, you control it, but not us.
You kept it. Right. Yeah.
But I blame it all on, okay, so we know that the size of the government is huge, but the government, in my opinion, is the ground zero at fault across all these levels here.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. And that's kind of what we see here with these government websites. And so, the government's trying to do too much. It's trying to overstep its authority given to it in the Constitution. And it's trying to become, the world police instead of the government, right? And fundamentally, that's problematic, because we as taxpayers are funding that, and we never signed up to become the world police, right? When the Constitution was created, it wasn't created we the people, we the world police, right? It says we the people, right? And so the government was designed for us, the people, and it's been convoluted and twisted and turned into this. Into basically a service organization for immigrants rather than, right? I mean, that's kind of what it's become. Some other interesting websites here. Here's one that I like to point out, because a lot of people don't realize the U.S. government manual. How many people even know that
there's a manual?
How many people know the government has a manual? This is the official handbook of the federal government. And it was created in around the New Deal. The New Deal era publication was published as a loose leaf notebook originally. And the government manual is a regularly updated special edition of the Federal Register. Its contents include leadership tables and descriptions of agency activities and programs of the executive, judicial, and legislative branches, as well as activities and programs of quasi-official agencies and international organizations in which the United States participates as a member. And so this is sort of a hidden, like, people don't know about this, but it's very interesting. It's very eye-opening and interesting to see sort of the government, because of open records requests, the government has to tell us what they're doing, but they don't like doing that. So they are really good at hiding the information that they have to tell us. But one of my jobs, I just
think it's interesting because it says, so this was a Roosevelt deal I mean, because think about it. How many programs in his, well, it was 12 years that he served, right? In all of his 12 years, think about all the number of programs. He probably had to put a manual together because he increased the size of government so much. Nobody knew what they were doing.
Well, that's kind of where everything,
when the right hand quit knowing what the left hand was doing.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it started out as under the New Deal, and now it includes, you know, we're talking about atmospheric carbon dioxide, ATV safety, bank regulation, bird watchers, Bitcoin, bullying, bus travel, carbon monoxide, business opportunities, you know, all of these things, COVID, we're talking about, you know, the Electoral College, endangered species and wildlife, flood insurance. I mean, it just, the scope of things here, lessons of the Holocaust. Why is our government spending, you know,
well, look at the next one, LGBT
youth. Right. Why is our government spending money on LGBT youth?
So the Electoral College is the only thing that you read that has anything to do with the Constitution.
Right. Exactly. All of the rest of this stuff is way outside the scope of what government's supposed to even be having their hands in. Possibly veterans, right? But most of this stuff in law enforcement, maybe, you know, but there's a lot of just unnecessary stuff that's going on here. And so that's one of the main reasons I wanted to share these websites with you guys, and so that people are aware of what's going on, you know, that the consumer finance, and this is another one, the Federal Register. I don't know if you guys are aware of or read the Federal Register regularly, but did you know that our government has basically a newspaper that it puts out every day? It's called the Federal Register. It's the daily journal of the United States government.
Yeah, there have been some great things published in there.
Right, there has been, right, and so it's not all bad by any means. But what I want to point out is that we as citizens can have our voice heard here in the Federal Register by making public comment on new rules and regulations, and saying, you know, and having our voices heard. And a lot of people don't realize that they can do that they have that ability. And so I want to briefly point out, you know, one of the big topics going on right now is regulations to implement the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And there's this push to, you know, give pregnant workers more protections. And so, you know, a lot of people aren't even aware this is happening right now in our government. And so this kind of helps. And so this kind of helps let people know what is happening in government without a spin, right? You know, if you go to CNN every day and you're letting them tell you what's happening in your government, you know, or even Fox, or, you know, MSNBC, any of those sources, if you're going to those sources instead of this one, you're not getting, you know, you're getting what they want you to know. This is telling you what is really happening, right, in your government on a daily basis. These are presidential documents, proclamations, and that's true. GovInfo also is another good site for that. The Congressional Record Daily Digest, the budget. You know, if you want to look at the money that the government is using, you can look at the budget right here. It's all public record. A lot of people don't realize how easy it is to find this information. It's just right here in a PDF if you want to look at it, right? So, but a lot of people argue about what's in the budget, and they don't know what it is, you know, what's in it and what it means and all of that. And so,
well, I figure when they start using actual money and not made up pieces of paper, then I'll actually put some effort into figuring it out.
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, that's a lot of the problem too.
Right, Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so one thing I just want to mention real quick about administrative agencies, and this is part of what the problem I was talking about. The government's just trying to do too much. How many administrative agencies do you think you are, without cheating and looking at that number that's already on the screen there?
I actually kind of knew because I had already looked it up. I mean,
okay.
You know what you really need, because that's national, But one
Yeah.
of the things that you really need to
There's
do is
state.
look up the number of boards and commissions in Oklahoma.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's another
We're
big
not
one.
quite up to that number, but we're
No,
getting close.
but getting pretty close. Yeah. So, I mean, why do we have 432 different departments, agencies, and sub-agencies in the federal government? I mean, that seems extremely excessive, right? Including everything from the Christopher Columbus Quincentenary Jubilee Commission to the Assassination Records Review Board and Oklahoma City National Memorial Trust. I understand that one, but some of these don't make a whole lot of sense. And we have all of these things, the USPS, the CDC, Secret Service, DHS, FBI, CIA, NASA, and the DOD, right? And a lot of this stuff is just the NSA, and a lot of this stuff exists basically as informational collecting agencies to keep tabs on America's own citizens, and so that's its own sort of its own ball of wax there, but it's problematic that every single one of these agencies has its own set of laws, its own set of regulations that every American is expected to keep up with and know on a daily basis. I mean, it's absurd.
Well, and the crazy thing is too, Matt, we're governed by those, and we should not be. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that we're governed by a bureaucracy, or that they can create these things and then have these rules that they say, well, you didn't follow this rule, therefore you're fined. No, you're not fining me.
Look what the CDC did during COVID.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about overstepping every piece of liberty that we have, just coming out saying, oh, you got to do this, you have to do that, this is our guidance. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And FEMA sometimes coming in and stepping in after disasters and telling people, where they are allowed to go and not go. And, it's all, there was something I read recently that I really liked that said, if you give your government the power to take away, if we give our government the power to take away our constitutional rights, under the guise of having emergencies, then we're encouraging our government to create emergencies so that they can justify taking away our rights. And that's absolutely true, and we're seeing that more and more and more happen. Right?
Do you know, it's the dog chasing its tail syndrome, and nobody seems to get it,
Yep, exactly. So in the interest of time, I'm going to jump through some of these here so that we can have a little more time to talk. Just real quickly, this is just talking about, what judges, the role judges and attorneys have in the system, and the ethical code of conducts that judges are expected to follow can be found here for Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Code of Judicial Conduct. And likewise, attorneys have to follow, oops, I went too far, the standards of professionalism, which is codified into Oklahoma law and can be found here. And attorneys can who do not follow the ethical code of the standards of professionalism can have different penalties and punishments depending on how egregious the violation is, but can include private reprimands, public reprimands, temporary suspensions, disbarments, and the like. Pretty much the whole gamut of, and can also be sanctioned, which is just a fine or a fee if money is involved, basically saying you have to pay certain things back, certain monies back that you may have taken or unethically. And so we have these ethical rules that exist for judges, for attorneys. We also have ethical rules that exist for teachers, which can be found here, the State Department of Education. And
we have those?
I know, it's surprising, right? Let's take a look at these. They're not nearly as exhaustive as the ones for judges and attorneys, but yeah. So teachers do have at least an ethical standard that they are supposed to be following.
Well, do they swear an oath to that? Do they sign some type of contract? I mean, how like as a parent,
Sure.
for example, myself, how would I keep a teacher accountable or some administrator accountable ethically? Like, is there a legal recourse? Is there some way that I mean, just, or is there just, hey, you should know you're supposed to be ethical, and then that's the end of it?
Yeah, I mean, so you
Do they
can.
swear an oath, or I mean, is there any type of like allegiance to that to hold them to that ethical system?
So that's a very good a question, and so it depends on what they're actually violating, right? And so it's a little sneaky how this is done, because there are two principles that are codified in the Oklahoma Administrative Code, that basically state, a teacher must strive to help each student, and must do these certain things, shall not unreasonably restrain students from independent action in the pursuit of learning. That's a big one that's not really being followed a lot lately. Shall not unreasonably deny student access to varying points of view. That's a biggie to me. Not unreasonably deny students access to varying points of view. Wow. In other words, be neutral and fair in what you're teaching. And some people now, interestingly, maybe a Democrat or a liberal would read that and say, well, that means that I get to teach, I get to use the schools to teach critical race theory, right, to students, because it says, students can't be denied access to varying points of view. Well, but we also have a law now that says that teachers are not to teach CRT to students. So that law would supersede this administrative code provision. So the way that these laws interplay with each other is complex. It's complex. It's not an easy answer. But to sort of answer your question of how do we enforce these principles, it's not like you can sue a teacher and say that and state that they're in violation of the Oklahoma Administrative Code. Technically you can, but under the doctrine of respondeat superior, that would go back to the schools, not appropriately managing their own employees. And so what you'd have to do is sue independent school districts for not for failure to adequately hold teachers accountable to the principles, the ethical principles that are codified under the Oklahoma Administrative Code. Okay, so that's the long answer. The short answer is we probably need an ethics counselor commission. So like the attorneys, the Oklahoma Bar Association has basically a ethics council or ethics board and a complaint process. So if an attorney does something or the judge does something that is unethical, you can file a complaint against them and the board will review it. I'm not aware of any such process or through the Oklahoma State Department of Education. So what I would say is, hey, Ryan, maybe this is something we need to look into. Maybe the Oklahoma State Department of Education needs to implement a ethics board who can look at conduct of teachers, just like the Oklahoma Bar Association does. And parents, or citizens can file complaints against teachers. And the board can conduct, investigations into those complaints and determine whether or not any action is warranted, and whether any violation of these principles, these ethical codes and principles, has in fact happened. I think that's something that definitely should happen, and maybe librarians as well, right? Ethics in especially librarians in public schools, but librarians should be held to the same standards as teachers if they're in public schools, right? I would at least make that argument that they should be held to these standards. So some of
Well,
these
and this
books,
is why this is important, what you're saying, because
absolutely,
Michael and I both have been involved in lawsuits, he with
Mhm.
Edmond Public Schools and us with Stillwater Public Schools. And basically what ends up happening is you either have to have an attorney who's willing to basically pro bono your case because, you know, even though you're great, Matt, you're going to charge me a chunk of money to do your job.
yeah, I mean,
you
my
know,
bills don't stop just because I'm doing a free case to somebody, you know, so it's hard
right?
to, yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay. So then we have to go out and pay an attorney. In Michael's case, he had to raise the money. In our case, we have an attorney, Maria Seidler, who is just precious and has been doing so much of this, raising her own money to do it for us. But then the problem comes in here. The school system has their own attorneys paid for by all of us, by tax
Yeah.
dollars,
Right.
that then go and try to beat us for holding them to a standard. So
Yeah,
there aren't a lot of parents that can afford to do that or find attorney. There aren't 80 Maria Seidlers out there who are willing to give up their, you know, who are retired and willing to do this on their own dime.
Absolutely. And that's a big, you know, and that's a great argument for why we need a ethics commission over
definitely.
Over, you know, so like, you know, the Oklahoma Bar Association, let's look at that real quick.
Because Matt, if these schools could lose accreditation and effectively lose money because of an ethical violation, you know, handed down from a state board, the same way they would lose accreditation through academics or some other way, then that would give a somewhat of a check and balance to the people to, you know, go in and report these things. Say, hey, this is happening. They need to have some repercussion because there is no repercussion now. I mean,
well, not forget too, the legislators are in our election system is supposedly have the Oklahoma Ethics Commission to monitor it. And obviously, you know, I have massive disagreements with that commission on some things.
Yeah.
But the point of the matter is there is one for that purpose.
There is, right. At least it exists.
About that is sound.
Yeah. Well, there's remedy in everything. You look at any kind of business, or, you know, if an electrician comes to my house and he does a bad job or does something unethical, I mean, I have recourse and remedy for that. When it comes to public education, there is nothing. There's no accountability there.
No.
Absolutely, I agree, and so that's why I say, you know, the Oklahoma Bar Association on the very front page, right here in the middle, the Ethics Council is right here, right, and you can click on that, and it talks about the Oklahoma Rules of Professional Conduct, standards of professionalism, and how to contact them, you know, and how to make complaints if you need to. You can. Here's the lawyer complaint process right here. You know, there's a judicial complaint process, right, but you can download the complaint form right here. Now, what about over here at the state superintendent website? Do you see anything at all that says anything about ethics? I don't, you know. So does that mean that teachers are not held to ethical standards? Maybe it does. You know, they're supposed to be. I mean, there are ethical. There are, you know, we do have some ethical guidelines and standards, but they're very minimalistic. We have, you know, attorneys have an entire code of rules to follow. There's basically three principles here and that's it. That's all we have on the books for teachers. So that's probably that I would charge our legislators to take a look at this and say, maybe we need to expand the ethical expectations of teachers a bit. And then, you know, we also want to be careful to some extent of driving people away from, you know, driving good teachers away from the teaching profession by overburdening them with too many ethical things. However, again, it's a balancing. However, I think we definitely have room to raise the bar here a bit with teachers, 100%.
Well, and I don't want to just pick on teachers either and just say, hey, this is only teachers. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know
Nurses,
what the
doctors.
deal is for like administrators and the higher,
administrators.
the real decision makers. Because a lot of teachers, Matt,
Mhm.
a lot of teachers are really good. I think a lot of teachers
Absolutely.
would actually appreciate an actual ethics type of enforcement in their school, because it would help bring back kind of the rule of law itself, because we know how bad behavior and discipline and all those things are in education. So if you have that kind of accountability, even at that teacher level, let alone go up the ladder to administration. But if you have that check and balance of accountability through an actual real ethics commission or board or something to investigate and do this kind of stuff, I mean, that itself could turn a lot of this stuff right around.
Well,
Absolutely.
and here's the interesting thing. So look at, hold on a second. I got to, don't know where that came from. So willful neglect of duty, repeated negligence in performance of duty, mental or physical abuse to a child. What I would argue that some of the counseling programs that we have and some of the SEL programs that we have are literally mental abuse of children. Incompetency. Well, tell me how many schools in Oklahoma have kids that are higher than 20% proficiency rating in English or math.
Right. Yeah.
Instructional. So that goes to instructional ineffectiveness too. So commission of an act of moral turpitude. How many times do you see a teacher doing something sexual with a child?
Right. And those are ground, if a teacher does these things, what's the punishment? Well, a teacher may, not shall, but may be dismissed or not reemployed. That's the big punishment for an act of moral turpitude with a student. You might lose your job. Okay, we probably need something a little more harsh on the books than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, we have this idea, I think, and a lot of this comes from the teachers' unions. I think lobbying against maybe an effort to impose further ethical issues, but it's one of those things that I would definitely charge Ryan and our state legislatures to take a look at a little more seriously, for sure.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that could really make a big difference in education in the state immediately.
Amen.
Matt. Not over the course of take 5 or 10 years. I mean,
no, like I think right away.
You put in a board or commission that their sole job is education ethics across the board. I think that really starts the ball rolling in the right direction, especially for academics in this state.
I think we should all three write a formal letter to our superintendent and ask him to do so.
I agree.
I don't think that's a bad idea, and I think he'd probably be receptive to that idea. Yep. I think a lot of teachers would be receptive to that idea, and may even sign a petition to some extent asking him to do that. I don't know, but I think the interest is there to do something like this. But it's one of those things that there's going to be pushback. So you want to.
Well, Carl McGaw just said if you're going to write ethics, they have to be very specific and limited. These are way too subjective. And I do agree with that. You do have to be specific, because especially today.
Yeah. What does moral turpitude mean?
Yes.
What does mental and physical abuse to a child mean? What is incompetency?
Yeah.
We need to define these terms, because these are way too subjective to be very useful to us in enforcing them, right?
Well, it sounds like before we even get an ethics commission, we need to make sure that we understand, what, be specific about these very things, because I definitely agree with Carl. I mean, because what ends up happening is, and I know this as a former classroom teacher, it depends on who's in power in the building at the time as to what's allowed. And then it's the same way at the superintendent's office. I mean, under Joy, there was a whole lot of stuff that was unethical that, you know, I certainly heard of, if didn't see, right, and beginning with her campaign, frankly, her first campaign, that was just allowed to go on. So I mean, I definitely agree. There's got to be some specificity there, such as, you know, moral turpitude, such as, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us kind of to this next topic, away from teachers and to legislators, you know, the ethics of our leaders who watch. There's a great, I'm a big Star Trek fan. Sorry to nerd out on you here for a minute. But
Me too.
there's
It's a sign of intelligence.
Right. I guess so. There's a great episode of Star Trek in the Next Generation series that's entitled "Who Watches the Watchers?" Right.
Huh.
And that's such a wonderful concept of, you know, there's always the possibility of unethical conduct happening at the highest level, because nobody's watching what the people who watch, you know, the people who are controlling the ethics, nobody watches what they're doing, right? There's no board of ethics over a board of ethics. So we have this perpetual problem of who watches the people who are doing the watching, right? And so the people at the highest levels of government have no oversight. And so our government is supposed to be a circle, right? That's the solution to this problem. Who watches the watchers, right? We have the three branches of government, and they're supposed to have checks and balances between the three of them, so that there's no specific, on top thing. But we have that for actual power, actual division of power. We don't necessarily have that for ethics, right? And so we have this idea of, we have the Oklahoma Ethics Commission, and the ethics laws and guidelines, which you can, I have all that laid out here, which governs the laws of the conduct of state officers and state employees, campaigns for state office. That's really the main thing that the Oklahoma Ethics Commission does, and state questions, and lobbyists, like things like PACs, political action committees, right? And there's these,
because none of those are bad.
Yeah, you're right. No, none of them. So, which is the source of pretty much all dark money, right? Comes from those. But these laws are basically disclosure. The ethical laws are basically disclosure. You have to disclose who's giving money and for what purpose. But let me ask you this: what good does that do at the end of the day? Right? How does that actually stop? It doesn't actually stop anybody from giving money. And so, we have this problem. I'm going to skip down a little bit to a later slide, because it illustrates, and we can come back maybe, but it illustrates, where's it? The electioneering ethical dilemma, right? So to get elected, you need to amplify your voice. You got to get votes if you want to get elected. So how do you amplify your voice? Well, that requires money. You have to send out mailers. You have to have social media management. You have to have campaign managers, phone banks, TV or radio spots. So you need money to get elected. Well, in order to get money, you have to sell promises to people who have money. So by the time you get elected, you owe a lot of money back in promises, and are no longer free to serve the people you promised to work for, but rather you are obligated to serve the money interests that you now must pay back.
Yeah.
Gosh, it reminds me of school choice. What about you, Michael?
Well, so we talk about money all the time. I mean, that's money talks.
Right. Absolutely. And this is,
and in a lot of these ethical, agencies and things like that you mentioned before, Matt, I mean, money is what drives all these things and all the things they do. I mean, they make their decisions based on money. I mean, look at like the pharmaceutical companies, like you were talking about with the prescriptions and this and that. I mean, that's all based 100% on how much money they're going to get. And then there's kickbacks to the government in some way, or these agencies, or, whatever. It's ridiculous.
It is. But I think there's actually some common ground here between conservatives and liberals on wanting more ethical regulation. Because, you know, I listened to some of my friends across the aisle and on the more on the left side, and they seem to want ethical regulation just as much as the other side does. I think there's this general sense of people are sick of the just, you know, the win at any cost sort of mentality. In government and especially in the higher levels of government, and this just, you know, back and forth infighting and bickering and all of that. I think people want to return to a sort of sense of civility at the very least.
Yeah.
Right.
But Matt, one thing I want to ask you, since we're right here in this particular point, I mean, ethics is kind of a social agreement, you know, how we're going to do things, you know, as a society. But when you have something so polarized, like the right and the left, and on some of these issues that, I mean, are so far on either side, I mean, how do you actually get an ethical solution when you have a group that is so one side and a group that is so the other side?
Yeah. So in order to find common ground, we might not be able to find common ground on an issue, but we probably could find common ground on a process, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like,
oh no, that totally makes sense, because you're right. There are lots of things that I'm not going to agree with the left on, but
right.
I could agree with them on a way to make things happen,
right,
that would benefit us both, you know, like in ethics. Yeah. Makes perfect sense.
And then making sure that everyone has fair representation of their side on the ethics board. So if we're going to have an ethics board, maybe we need of 10 members, maybe 4 of them need to be, left leaning, and maybe 1 of them in the middle, and maybe 4 right leaning, and then maybe 1 independent, right? Or something along those lines, so that there's some sort of adequate representation of the, you know, the American people in these boards. And then what that does by setting the system up that way is, if you only have 4 people on your side in a 10-person board, and you need at least 6 people to get, you know, a majority plus 1 of the vote, you've got to flip at least 2 people on the other side in order to make anything happen. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what that does is it encourages, if you ever want to do anything and get anything accomplished, that means you gotta learn how to extend olive branches. And that's what that's what people have forgotten how to do. Most our legislators up in Washington is, you know, we all used to get a little bit of what we wanted, because they make deals and say, okay, you want this, I'll give you this, but I want that, so you need to give me that, and we'd make concessions. And that's how, you know, when I do a mediation for someone in the legal field, that's how mediation works, right? Is you know, think of it like a divorce. I've got 2 people who are polar opposites of each other. They don't agree about anything. They all, you know, they both think that they should have the child, the house, the kid, the car, right? So we have to figure out a way that's equitable between the 2 of them to for them both to continue to have their parental rights and continue to have a fair distribution of their property, and all of these things. And so we sort of come to this. We have this process where we come to this. We sit down at a table with either side, and who have these attorneys representing them, and we talk back and forth with a mediator. And the mediator's job is to make sure communication is happening between the 2 polar opposite sides. And that's what we're missing in politics, essentially, is a mediator, somebody who is helping to make sure that that both sides are actually listening to and hearing each other.
Well,
and then
making
concessions.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I sought you out in the first place. I mean, we can look at our own Republican Party in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're all divided up into factions. One group is
Sure.
doing this, another group is doing this. And as I've always said, being a conservative and leading conservatives is like leading cats. I mean, that's the one reason why we always seem to be on the losing end. You have one
Yep.
side who just likes to follow, and then you have the other side that wants to lead. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to lead. So
Yeah.
it can just be impossible to do that. But we've gotten to a point where at one time, we could argue about conservative principles and say, okay, that one maybe so much, but this one's really a central principle. Can't we at least get behind this one? Well, but not
Yeah.
if we don't do this one. And then we have to have,
Right.
so we're arguing now to the point where we can't even as conservatives be in the same room and decide to aim all of our weaponry down the line at one target, because
Yeah.
we're just mainly in a circular firing squad all the time. And
Yeah.
we're missing the ability to, apparently, we've lost individual moral responsibility. And
Yes.
we have to always be right, and we have to be the one that's always right. And I think a lot of it, because I saw a lot of this come up after the January 6th thing and after the election,
Mm-hmm.
Trump's last election.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I think it woke up so many people, and they had
Mm-hmm.
no idea what to do, because the scales just suddenly fell from their eyes, and they, so what do I do about it?
What do
We'll
I do?
understand what an actual course of action is.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes they'll get angry because
Sure.
that there's not a solution. And this, Matt, as a mediator, that tends to be what happens when you don't give people solutions. They'll
Mm-hmm.
just get mad,
Yeah.
and they'll get mad at one another, and they don't know what to do. And I don't know how you fix it at this point, because I'm as frustrated as anybody else over that stupid election. And I have the fear, with many other people, that our elections have now been compromised,
Sure.
that the voice of the American people isn't really being heard. I have those same concerns, and I'm not necessarily sure what to do with them either. But I don't think yelling at my fellow conservatives or splintering off or any of those things
It's
is
not
going to help.
helpful, right? One of the things that the Democrats do well is that we could learn from them is that they take groups of very disjointed people who have almost nothing in common, and they find commonality among them through feelings, like how they feel to be to be a minority, right? And so it's sort of like, what does being a Hispanic minority have to do with being gay in America? Well, really not much, right? There's not a whole lot of common ground between being Hispanic and being gay, except that both of those people feel like their voice isn't heard, or that they don't have fair representation in the system, right? And so something that Democrats do that's been very effective is they take this this sort of idea of, if you've ever felt like like the world is unfair, come to our party. We will, we have all the answers, we have all the solutions. And so it's sort of they've been able to unite these groups that really don't have any connection with one another, and bring them into this big umbrella by uniting them under one banner of, we feel helpless, essentially. And I think conservatives have that same feeling to some extent, or are at least starting to more nowadays. And so, how do we unite the party? That it's easier said than done, right?
Oh, yeah. Because you got people out there now who will just say, I'm not compromising, you're a rhino. Well, okay, but what makes you a rhino? I mean, now I'm a rhino to people because I'm not going to bash other people or jump into a group with somebody else. All of this is simply nonsense and getting us literally nowhere.
No, it is right. Shooting yourself in the foot and blaming the gun. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? And so, to some extent, we have to go back to the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay, maybe we can't all agree on who to support or what path to take forward, but we can agree that we believe in the Constitution, we believe in the rule of law, and we want it enforced. And so maybe we can just go back to fundamentals of what can we can agree that we want the law to be enforced. So let's make that happen, right? We want ethics enforced. Let's make that happen, right? And then leave some of these polarizing matters to out of the law, because really, some of these things that are dividing us aren't even issues that government should be involved in the first place. So why are we allowing them to control the conversation when instead we should be looking for ways to mutually benefit our society and our economy and those types of things, development at the local level or whatever, those types of things that we can agree on, that we all want and all need. And less time spent focusing on the things that we're just hitting heads against. I think that's a big, a big key to the solution of that problem.
Well, Carl just said, the Bible has the best morals, the 10 Commandments. We stopped educating with good morals because we have a separation of church and state. Well, and it's interesting, to hear him say that, because I just started reading the book Bonhoeffer, and Bonhoeffer's, I've got to go back and take my book and read this because I listen audiobook. But I want to go take it and actually read the section where he said this was during his education himself, where he talks about there has to be a separation between church and state, because what happens is the state comes in and affects the church even. And we always think it's going to be the other way, that the church will affect the state. But what ends up happening is, I just saw him say bad culture is pushing bad morals. Well, when you get a bad culture, it pulls everything down, and you're literally doing the opposite. By combining church and state, you're literally doing the opposite eventually of what you started out trying to do in the first place, because bad morals will always pull everything down the other way. And morals are always going to start in the home. You can't, it's kind of like, we talked about this at one point in our earlier conversation about, Matt, where laws cannot enforce behaviors. I mean, they can to some degree. You can't drink at the bar and go get in your car and kill somebody driving on the way home.
Right.
But they can't make you can pass all the laws you want, but if internally we don't understand what morals are and we haven't been taught what those are, no set of laws is going to affect us. And honestly, I think people who are psychotic, who literally are sociopaths and don't understand the difference between wrong and right, they're the perfect examples to go to here in that illustration. Right. There are literally places, there are literally people who don't understand, the difference between wrong and right. Oh,
and that's something we talked about on the phone when we spoke last week, is that there's been a fundamental change in how we deal with mental health, right? And the DSM and there's always these constant changes in the world of psychology, sociology, that seems to push the idea of moral relativism, where now it's oh, you're sexually attracted to children. Well, that doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you a minor attracted person. And we need to change the terminology to paint you as a victim of your own brain rather than somebody who has moral and ethical mental problems that need to correcting, right? And so we have this sort of general change in in two things, and it started in the sociology world. The first was the book that came out. I think it was Dr. Spock's book about children that came out. That basically, we need to. What's that?
Oh, no, I was completely agreeing with you because I was given that book when I had my first child in 1983. And I looked at that and I thought, are you joking me? What are we talking about here? What am I here for then? Let them do whatever they want. What?
Yeah. But this pervasive mentality of let's let the kids just do whatever they want. And it's okay because there's really no right or wrong. It's all just relative. So let's just let them do whatever they want. And it's created an entire, it's created this problem, because now we have, like you said, 1980. So now we have, 40 years of generations of kids that, whose parents just basically, let them do whatever they want and didn't teach them right from wrong and said,
and let's dovetail on top of that real quick, Matt. What came in 40 years ago? The Department of Education, like Carl said, the government really has no business being in the education of our kids in any capacity.
No, we need Carl on our board.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. But there again, you have the growing overreach of the government, which doesn't have our best interests, our kids' best interests, education. I mean, if the government was so good being in education, I mean, we would be going up, not down. I mean, it's pretty obvious we're getting worse and worse. The just the culture in general, the morals and the values that are just taught. I mean, you don't even have discipline in a classroom anymore. You have to basically just try to control the worst students, and there's nothing you can even do about it. I mean, I agree. I told Jenni a long time ago, I sent her a meme. I said, we need to make a little meme about when this country was founded. Back, I got my Betsy Ross flag on today, but you go back to colonial America, it was all homeschool. I mean, it's literally homeschool,
one room schoolhouses,
self-sufficiency, self-reliance. And we produce those people are the generations before us. They produced everything that we have now. I mean, because of those things. I mean, I just hate that the government is so involved.
And that was the generation that won 2 world wars and sent mankind to the moon.
Isn't that crazy? It just every time I even think about that, it just I don't understand. I just simply don't understand the mentality. I guess we were talking the other day, Michael and I were talking about how, when things happened with our kids at school or with other, kids or whatever, the first thing we do is turn around and look at our own kids and go, what'd you do? What's your issue? What kind of thing did you get into? I mean, we were never looking at any, but that's not the way it is anymore. The way it is anymore is who did what to you, and it's got to stop. But I think it does go back to what Carl said earlier about the state-run public school system is the largest church, because
it really
once we start using public funds to do something that was another thing in Bonhoeffer's book that was so interesting to me. So he was right in the middle because he lived in Prussia. So before Germany was ever even created, he lived in Prussia, and the Prussian system of education is where we get our education. And it was so bad that his mother, and so think about how long ago that was, the middle 1800s, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And his mother was like, I'm not sending you people to this school system. This is ridiculous. It's all you'll do what I say, and this is what it is, and the government runs it, and this is how. And so it's just fascinating that somehow that we believe that this system is the best system to educate our kids, and you have people literally going out creating all kinds of chaos on social media, calling people names, doxing them over public education.
Yep. Well, and that brings me to the subversion process here, which I think I think it's important for people to realize, to understand this and how it works. I don't think people, once you see it, you can't ever unsee it, if that makes sense. So we need to awaken people to what's happening to them, to us as a country, so that we can start to see it and not be affected, and choose to not be affected by it, right? And so the KGB and the CIA both, and a lot of these, these sort of secret organizations back in the day created this idea of psychological operations, right? PSYOPs, they call them, right?
PSYOPs.
Yeah. And so and we use them, back in Iran Contra to go into places and to sow seeds of disinformation, misinformation. Well, it works so well that our competition, I almost call them enemies, aren't really our enemies, but our competition, the other world leaders, China, Russia, took notice of how well this worked and started using it and implementing it on us in America. All right. And it's known as the subversion process. And how it works essentially is you attack ethics and morality is one of the first things that you attack. Religion. And these are the areas that are attacked. This is called the first stage. There's 4 stages. The first stage is the demoralization process. Okay. And so the idea is to attack, it says religion, but really attack morals is the goal. But religion, our morals stem from our religious beliefs in America, or at least used to. And so that was why religion was attacked or decided. And education is attacked. And then media is attacked and used, and culture, which includes things like patriotism, right? And so all of these things are attacked, and the goal is a death wish for religion. And methods are entertainment, okay, commercials, politics, and education. We teach permissiveness and relativity. You'll notice again, relativity is taught because it's part of the demoralization process, and this creates ignorance. We use the media to monopolize, manipulate, discredit, divert, and the result is myopia. And then we use culture. We use false heroes. It's no accident that the most watched and expensive movie of the last decade has been the Marvel movies and Disney, right?
The Avengers series.
The Avengers series and all of that, right? And Star Wars, and people love that stuff. What is that? False heroes, right? Why care about false heroes? Well, because it takes away from real heroes. Real heroes can never attain the level of awesomeness that a false hero can attain. And so it makes figures like Jesus seem less amazing, because we have figures like Iron Man out there doing these awesome things, right? And kids are falling in love with Iron Man instead of Jesus. And that's the goal, right? It takes away the role models, and it creates these addictive fads. So after the demoralization process, we sort of enter this destabilization process where you attack law and order, and this idea of mistrusting justice. Oh, the justice system is all corrupt and it's all racist, right? Our justice system is all racist. And then we have this idea of social relations, rights versus obligations. we push the idea of less individual responsibility, which goes back to relativity. In a system of relativity, the individual is never responsible because they're always a victim of the system, right? Security, intelligence, police, military, attacking, and we see this, right? We see that we need to defund the police. We need to defund the military. We make love, not war, right? Internal politics, disunity, party antagonism, and like you were talking about, having these polarizations, party polarizations. That's the goal. Pushing the parties as far apart as possible so that they can't cooperate to get anything done. And that fundamentally makes us an unstable society. Foreign relations, creating, using victimization and creating salt friends, salting the earth so that we can't, those types of things. And then attacking family, health, race, population, labor, right? All of these things through sports. And this leads to destabilization. It leads to a power struggle. It leads to economic instability, society instability, and foreign isolation. And then we introduce a crisis like COVID, okay? When you introduce a crisis to a nation that is polarized, what happens? They cannot agree on how to deal with the crisis, and that causes a collapse. And then a new normal, right? And we heard this term all the time, the new normal, right?
Matt, you're depressing me.
Well, hey, don't worry. There is a solution to all this. I'm explaining the problem, but I'm going to also tell you the solution, okay? The new normal then becomes a demoralized society that is in an economic
is ignorant, doesn't have any religion, and
power struggle. Exactly, right. Yep. And so that's the goal of the psychological subversion process, these psyops processes. And so we have this idea of moral relativism over moral absolutism. And you can see it happen, okay? If you look right here, okay, so absolute morality, people who believe in absolute religious morality, okay, elders, 33%, boomers, 42%, surprisingly there, maybe. Yeah. And then Gen Xers, 33 again, and millennials, 31. So we have this sort of downcline in absolute morality, and relativity, we have this upswing of people who are beginning more and more to view morality as being relative. This is an indication that this process is working, especially in our younger people. But interestingly, when you look at this, practicing Christians, 60% say morality is absolute, but there's 28% of practicing Christians and then another 14% who aren't thinking that are kind of on the fence about whether or not the Bible teaches morality. That's interesting, very interesting to me. And then people with no faith, 61%, are moral relativists, right? And so,
because that was a Barna poll from 2015. Barna is great, by the way. If you ever want to go to their website, they have been doing polls like this for years and years and years. I mean, decades.
Absolutely.
And they're very good at it. So you picked a good one here, Matt. Matt knows his stuff. But there is actually a new one that they did in, I believe it was 21. Don't hold me to it, but I think it was 21.
I'm sure it's even more.
It was terrible. It was
yeah.
depressing.
I was going to say, it's even more, right? It's getting worse, not better. So here's what's interesting is, the highest, this was the question that they asked people, and that people agreed with, is the highest good, according to our society, is finding yourself and then living by what's right for you. That is moral relativism, right? And that's what's pervading modern American society. There's a tremendous amount of individualism in our society that's reflected in the church too. We've got millions of Christians have grafted this new age dogma onto their spiritual person. When we peel back the layers, what we find is that many Christians are using the way of Jesus to pursue the way of self.
Yeah.
And so we even find, like you said, we find that religion, the separation of church and state has worked for the state, but not so much for the church, because the church has become more reflective of the state and not the other way around. While we wring our hands about secularism spreading through culture, a majority of church-going Christians have actually embraced corrupt, me-centered theology, right?
Yes.
And so these are sort of these six tenets of relativism, and 91% of U.S. adults somewhat agree that the best way to find yourself is by looking within yourself, rather than.
That's Oprah. That's the whole Oprah thing, you know?
Yep. Yeah. Rather than looking to God, right? And even modern Christians, most modern Christians seem to believe that the Bible is a source of moral norms and that transcend a person's culture, and that those moral truths are absolute rather than relative to circumstances. Yet at the same time, a solid majority ascribes to 5 of the 6 tenets of the new moral code.
Yeah.
So it's, this may sound bleak, but all right, here's the good news. It also represents an opportunity for leaders and mentors, especially church leaders and community mentors, people like us who are prepared to coach people toward deeper wisdom and greater discernment and away from self-fulfillment as a moral compass. And so we have this sort of idea of moral relativism is the terrible idea that narcissistic tendencies are the highest moral goal, right? And so we're creating a society of.
Hold on, Matt. I have to take my picture here just with us. Sorry.
All right.
I used to forbid my kids from doing that because I was like, oh my gosh, taking selfies is like the most narcissistic. It makes me cringe.
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of brought up that way, and I just can't.
We have generations of kids in love with their own reflections, and we're teaching them through social media that the most important thing in life is how many likes you can get from strangers. So what is that teaching them? That the opinions of others are the most important things that matter to your life, right? And how you look. Yeah. And so these are terrible things to be teaching young people, right? And so at the same time, we're teaching that narcissistic tendencies are the highest moral goal, which is the goal of moral relativism. We're also simultaneously teaching kids that we're weaponizing the status of the self as a perpetual victim to attain the goals of self-justification, to avoid personal consequence and responsibility, and to obtain instant gratification. So I'm a victim of the system. Woe is me. And I'm never responsible for any of my own behavior or my plight in the world because I'm just a victim of a system that always has its foot on my back, right?
Well, and another thing, and people have laughed at me about this, and my own kids laugh at me about this, which obviously I don't care about. But I think one of the other things that they did culturally to kind of we avoid personal consequences, right? It can't be me. I mean, if you ever say, hey, what are you thinking there? My bad. What does my bad mean? My kids were expressly forbade of saying my bad because it doesn't mean anything. You're not saying
You're not saying I'm sorry.
I apologize.
Right.
You're saying some phrase that is completely meaningless that you just, popped off the top of your head. But the whole idea is I am sorry. I apologize for what I did. That was wrong. I take the consequence. And it's funny, but even though people will laugh about that, that's exactly the kind of stuff we're trying to say here. It exudes into the culture in these weird ways, and we overlook them because we think, well, what difference does it matter if you say my bad, right?
Right.
But it's these kinds of things that seep into the culture that just bring everything right down into the trash can.
Exactly. And so the 3 hardest things for people under 40 to say is, I'm sorry, it was my fault, and I don't actually know everything, right?
Yeah.
So, and all of
My
these
bad.
things, the reason that all of these things are so hard to say is because they bruise the ego. Right?
Oh, yeah.
They're an assault on the ego, and we have this idea. There's this idea that the worst thing you can do in our society is bruise somebody's ego, right? Which of course reinforces the idea of moral relativism and creates narcissistic tendencies, right? And so we have this idea of sort of my feelings validate reality rather than moral absolutism, which there is a good and there is a bad, and these things are clearly defined and they are absolute. And your actions, your conduct is judged. Your individual actions are judged against these absolute good and bad standards, right?
Yeah.
Which is what Christian, but people don't like this, right? Oh, you're being judgmental. You're
That's so judgy, Matt.
That's so judgy, right? That's so judgy. Well,
judgy. You're so judgy.
The problem, of course, with moral relativism is that there's no standards in which to judge conduct. So if somebody can justify pretty much anything, then they can get away with it. It's not wrong, right? They can justify it because they're a victim of their own brain. Oh, I'm not a pedophile. I'm a minor attracted person because my brain is, or I'm there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with being gay or lesbian. I'm just attracted to people of the same sex or the same gender. Well, why is, we have to ask ourselves the question of why, fundamentally, is it wrong to do something like that, to be attracted to a minor person? Well, it goes back to the fact that minors don't understand, they can't consent to or understand that relationship. They can't understand a relationship at the same level. So as an adult, and it goes back to consent, the issue of consent, right? And so we have this sort of dichotomy of these things are definitely good and bad, but if we can make them morally relative, then we can justify almost anything, including rape and murder. As long as it's, so how did this happen? Well, I was talking about the PSYOP stuff back in the Iran-Contra. This is actually from the CIA. This is their psychological operations and guerrilla warfare handbook that they used during the Iran-Contra ordeal. You can find the whole thing here. I've got a link to it. It's a very interesting study in what's currently happening in America. Yeah. And the CIA was just beginning to use it back during the Iran-Contra PSYOPs. And yes, you read that correctly. Over here, it says the warfare goal is the mind, right? It says, in effect, the human being should be considered the priority objective in a political war and conceived as the military target. So the human being, the human mind itself is the military target of guerrilla warfare. The human being has the most critical point in his mind. Once his mind has been reached, the political animal has been defeated without necessarily receiving bullets. And so that's the goal of psychological operations. And guerrilla warfare is born and grows in the political environment, in the constant combat, right? That is inherent to all human beings, the environment. And then it says this, which is sickening. This concept of guerrilla warfare as political war turns psychological operations into the decisive factor of the results. The target then is the mind of the population. All the population, our troops, the enemy's troops, and even the civilian population. And unfortunately, even children are considered to be morally acceptable targets in psychological warfare. And so that's how we got, unfortunately, to where we are now.
Sounds like global Marxism.
That's exactly what it is. You got it. And so we have the 4 stages that I talked about earlier. the demoralization stage, the destabilization stage, the crisis, and the normalization period, until the next cycle repeats. But we can defend ourselves, okay? And one of the best ways to defend ourselves, this is a great website, Disinformation Nation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this website.
No, I love that. Wow.
Yeah, and so it's a website that talks about propaganda and how it works and why it matters and how to combat it. And so there's a quick little video here if you want to take a look at it. Hopefully it'll play.
It's playing. I just can't hear it. Is it supposed to be?
Are you not able to hear it?
No, can you? Oh, and your audio is up. I wonder why.
Well, sometimes on your side, Matt, sometimes there's a little pop-up that comes up that says you have to allow the audio to actually play. Maybe,
gotcha.
Maybe it's not up.
It says you are sharing your entire screen, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes on those videos, Jenny, from the guest side, there's a little pop-up that comes up that says,
okay,
do you want to allow like your screen to actually play sounds in the broadcast? But I'm not sure.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I'm not sure how to. Well, that's okay. We don't have to. We don't have to.
Well, we're
watch
only almost to 2 hours, so
right. I know. We don't have to watch the video. I just want to. The main thing I want to take a look at is how propaganda works, and we can look at it this way. So, propaganda, of course, is designed to promote a specific cause, a specific ideology, or a specific group of individuals, and then or reinforce thoughts and feelings inside of somebody that may already be there and make them stronger and make them grow, right? That's the goal. The target audience is the people who need to see the message. And sometimes it's people who already agree with the message, and sometimes it's people who don't agree with the message, and that changes how the propaganda is set up and staged. And then extra credit is if you disguise the delivery. The general goal is you don't want anyone to know that they're actually looking at propaganda.
Being propagandized.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's the goal. And so, propaganda isn't inherently good or evil. It kind of depends to some extent on your outlook. It's a tool, just like any tool that can be used to our advantage or to our disadvantage. It is legal because it is covered under the First Amendment. Now, covert propaganda is illegal. But as long as it's overt propaganda, it's legal. It's First Amendment allows it, allows information, real or fake, objective or manipulative, honest or deceptive, to circulate freely. Okay.
Wait, I think somebody better give that memo to like Facebook and, Twitter and some of the social media sites.
Yeah,
might
exactly.
Need that information.
They might need to know that exactly. And advertising, of course, is one of the most common forms of propaganda we see every day. Carrot juice cures everything. Okay. And so the four SEED is sort of the acronym here of the propaganda master's toolbox. Simplify, over here, our free press. Look at our free press, MSNBC. We have the best news story, but look over there at their controlled press. Their stuff is propaganda. Our stuff is free, So it's an oversimplification of reality. That's, kind of the point there. Exaggeration. Celery juice, it's a life-saving medicine. Really? Celery juice is a life-saving? Okay. Over exaggeration of almost anything and everything. We see that constantly in most of the news articles today because it sells headline. Over exaggerating things it's a debate that's at the end of the hook, right? That gets people interested in reading it or learning more about it. Exploitation, specifically exploitation of ignorance. The H1N1 flu shot contains carcinogens and immunotoxins and neurotoxins. Potassium chloride, guys, that's just salt. It's not a neurotoxin, but it's, the way that this is phrased makes it look it's exploiting the ignorance of the people who don't maybe know what potassium chloride actually is, right? Or sodium. It's salt, right? But no, it's not salt. It's a carcinogen. It's an immunotoxin. Okay. And then division, which is what you're talking about. Promoting division. It's us versus them. That's one of the main goals of propaganda. Dehumanization, I would also add, is another main goal. So propaganda isn't anything new. It's been around for years and years. Why propaganda matters, and this is a good little demonstration here of this girl on the left has been watching watching news channels, 24-hour news cycle, and you can see the effect it has on her psychology, because she's been programmed for the last several hours to see the world as some evil thing. And this same girl on the right turned off the TV and hit the off button and is not watching the propaganda, right? And so the idea here is that it psychologically, it does something to us when we see all of this constant negativity. It drains us, and it prevents us from having the freedom to make good decisions. We're more apt to leap to conclusions, waste money, deepens divisions, endangers everyone, and it damages our democracy fundamentally, and our elections, and whether or not they're trustworthy. Rewriting history, we see this a lot, right? This attempt to rewrite history and to slant everything in favor of one ideological way of thinking. Blurring lines between facts and fictions, deep fakes, especially with AI and technology. Yeah. It's hard nowadays to know whether or not something's real, right?
Yeah.
They take sound bites and clips of the president, and did he really say that or not?
Yeah. And I saw a video of him the other day with this weird thing going on his chin.
Yeah.
Well, and Matt,
that's a deep fake.
That propaganda run long enough and run with enough kind of merit behind it actually changes the culture. It changes how we think, how we feel, what we buy, what we do. It's like, Jenny, when I said you need to read that book, Propaganda by Edward Bernays. I mean, you go back to that book and just look at as an example of an American staple in today's society, like eggs and bacon for breakfast. You know who did that? Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays was paid. They put out a whole commission. They did this whole deal. He basically created that with this whole deal. And like I said, I think I mentioned like the women smoking. They branded that whole deal in propaganda as like freedom torches. That's so it works its way into society, and then it just becomes part of our culture. We don't even realize it's a psychological operation. I mean, I'm so glad, Matt, that you started hitting on. I mean, this stuff is like right up my alley. I mean, this is what I try to look at all the time. But you're 100% right. And and just another side of that, the whole thing is kind of like a Hegelian dialectic, where they already have the problem, they have the reaction, and they know what the solution is. It's already all created. They're just running the process on us.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. It's already, the goal is the outcome always with propaganda.
Yes.
And it's not it's not to actually, even people, even when we see propaganda that is opposing to our points of view, even that has a psychological effect on us, and it makes us feel defeated, right? When we see.
So I'm going to give you an example really quick too, because how when in Trump's last election, and I'm just using this because it was hammered in the media for a long time afterwards, Fox Business, who was doing the election returns at the time, and came out and called Biden the winner before anything else. And it's been shown over and over again that if a voter has not left his home, is not out and ready to go vote, they simply won't leave their home if they believe somebody else has won
has
the
already
election.
won.
And
What's the point? You don't need
that's
my vote.
propaganda.
Absolutely.
That's literally propaganda.
Absolutely it is.
And they do it frequently, these dumb news, who come out and say, well, we're doing election returns. No, you're figuring out a way to propagandize us to keep voters. It's voter suppression. Really, it's propaganda to create voter suppression.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And there's propaganda to create fear. There's propaganda to create voter suppression. There's propaganda to create, and the goal of propaganda and the propaganda machines in our country, which are trillions of, is a $1 trillion industry at this point, is to get someone to buy your product, get someone to watch your channel, get someone to it's all about money at the end of the day. These people are money is still the fundamental motivation behind why they do what they do, and power, of course, and it's also about getting somebody to vote or to not vote. And so propaganda aimed toward your own side is trying to encourage them to get out and go vote. Propaganda aimed towards the other side, like you said, is trying to encourage them to think that the vote is already over and their vote is pointless and to stay home, right? And so, the whole thing is rise above it, right? How do we fight back against it? Rise above it. Strategy one, do a gut check. Harness the power of doubt. If something feels wrong about it, there probably is. It probably is. You need to think a little bit more into it.
Well, and Christians call that discernment. And I think a lot of Christians really need to practice that discernment. I mean, God gives you the little voice in your head. He is the little voice in your head. If it's something isn't right, it's not right.
You may be thrilled or outraged, depending on what what your point of view is and what you're looking at, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's propaganda. It does, however, mean you should take a minute and think about it, pay special attention, and ask, wait, is this the whole story? That's one of the biggest questions we need to ask. Is this the whole story? Or are we just getting a portion of it? Do the facts support the shocking claims? Do the facts support what is being claimed here? Usually, if it's propaganda, it doesn't, or it only partially does. And why did the content creator take such a provocative approach? That's the other question. When we see headlines like, New Jersey man killed in accident, why, I don't know. I live in Oklahoma. I feel sorry for the guy, but why do I care? Right. What is this? Why is this being pushed on me?
Because it was a gun that actually jumped out of his night table and killed him.
Right. Right. Exactly. There's always a real reason why a story like that is being pushed. And you need to look past the propaganda and ask yourself these questions of why is the person that created this want me to believe this? Right. Yeah. So doing the gut check, and then also being careful on what you invite into your home. Try to limit your interactions with inflammatory or questionable content. Once you interact with it, your chances of seeing more of it increase, okay? Because Facebook, for example, uses user data to target potential mothers with content, taking a shortcut to a prime audience. Platforms like YouTube use algorithms that tend to recommend extreme click-grabbing content for people, right? And so, especially on a young mind, kids and teenagers, this stuff is very,
which is why we've said over and over again, parents have to have apps in place that throttle their kids' ability to get onto the internet and what they can see on the internet.
Exactly. So before you browse online, log out of your browser or choose one that doesn't track you, such as Firefox or there's DuckDuckGo or whatever. There's lots of ones out there now that will block these trackers, and there's apps that'll help you block these trackers, and that helps limit some of this stuff. Log out of platforms like YouTube and Facebook once you've finished accessing the content. Avoid using likes and share buttons on web pages, which connect these sites directly to your social media accounts. Anytime something asks, we want access to your Facebook account, usually is not something you want to, periodically delete your search history, because, it uses cookies and search history to help, bring that content to you. So those are good internet practices to teach kids. And then find your five. This is this idea of having multiple sources of news. And they recommend 2 general news sources that you look at on a regular basis that you agree with, 2 news sources you don't agree with, and then 1 sort of independent source that covers it from a specific perspective, such as a particular demographic, religious group, or profession. Professional, like peer-reviewed journals, scientific journals, legal journals, things like that. Or sometimes I like watching independent news sites from other countries. Get outside of America and look at news sources from outside of the American mindset, and you might be surprised at some of the different things that you see. You can also use sites such as Newstrition or All Sides that help you evaluate different sources of news, even though I will say sometimes even these sites that evaluate the other sites, again, we go back to the problem of who watches the watchers. These sites that evaluate these sites are also paid money to give specific evaluations of the other one, of the people that they're evaluating. So you still got to be careful about who you're trusting about that type of thing. So, how do we protect our children? That's the bottom line of, propaganda. How do we protect ourselves and protect our children? Our children are the most valuable resource that we have. And this is why the battle for psychological control of our nation begins and ends in the minds of the next generation, because the future of our nation is currently in their brains, right? Yeah. So our enemies want to demoralize our children, turn them against their own country, their own parents, their own culture, their own history, their own foundation beliefs, and that make them and America strong. So how do we fix it? Well, parents still have the legal power to control how their children are raised, but is this good news considering the millennials and Gen Xers are now primarily the current parental authorities? Yes, because even among the younger generations, there is still a vibrant culture of traditionalists fighting against all of this new cultural change. And we can and should be empowering those folks in the younger generations. Those parents can monitor closely the content their children are exposed to and help influence other parents, right, in their generation to do the same. Keep them away from public schools, limit their time spent in front of social media, TV, music, news, video games, etc. That's how this propaganda is getting into our homes and into the minds of our kids. However, ultimately, parents can't hide their kids from the world forever. So the most important thing a parent can do is keep an open, honest, and deep ongoing conversation with their kids so that they can continue, so that the kids continue to trust the family unit as the ultimate source of credible information. And that,
I hate to say this, but we're going to have to end on that one because Michael's going to have to go here in a second.
Okay. But that's fine. We're pretty much.
We need to bring them back on and keep rolling.
Yeah, we totally do. And as a matter of fact, I was thinking about actually taking this video and chopping it up into 2 separate parts.
Sure,
because one of them, the whole propaganda section, I think people are really going to have a considerable amount of interest in, and we need to really take the time to talk about that. But the sad thing about it is, I mean, we've got quite a number of people watching now, which is great. But the whole part where you talked about ethics, it's like people just don't care. And it's the
Yeah.
whole bottom line for everything that's going on. And our watcher this morning from Facebook, who's been commenting, Carl, just said something about really local control is the most important thing. And as managing our own families and being in our own communities and doing what we can inside our own communities is the only way to change any of it, if at this point it's changeable. So
well, it is, but there's the if there's anything to really take away from this, it's that people can't expect instant changes. While
you
there
can't
are
turn
some
the Titanic on a dime.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it took us 40 years. We've established that it took us 40 years to get here. It's going to take us 40 years to undo that, damage. Maybe a little quicker than 40 years if we're lucky, but it's going to take time, right? You don't just undo psychological
warfare
damage overnight. And so,
Well,
but it is possible. The good news is it is possible. So.
Yeah. Well, if I can chime in on that, Matt, I think the first step is really, as a father, I have 5 kids. It's just really realizing and taking the responsibility that I'm responsible for myself. I'm responsible to teach my kids that they are responsible. I want to empower them. They're in a constant state of disempowerment with all this conditioning, just constantly. And you kind of mentioned it before, where we kind of have a total victim, mentality, to where everything is happening to me. I feel so bad. There's no empowerment in that. And that's where you get all this chaos. So who's the only person that's left to come in and solve that problem? The government, the big guys, so the more that they can sow these seeds of disempowerment and victimization and, this group and that group, the more that all that happens, now we're completely disempowered. They are the only answer to this. So I would say for me is first, just realize, yes, this stuff is happening. And second, I'm going to take responsibility to constantly just call it out as I see it to my kids. I'm the one responsible for how I feel, not the government, not this bully, not someone saying something like this. I'm responsible for how I feel. And as long as I do that, then I can start turning that ship, slowly through my own teachings to my kids and my friends and my family in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that that's right in line with that, that I completely agree with you, Michael, and that is that, Democrats love to, their message is you're a victim of an oppressive society and an oppressive government. And you know what the solution to that is? More government, right? That doesn't make sense, right? The problem is that the system is oppressive. So what's the solution? More system. What? So you're absolutely right. It doesn't make sense. I think at the end of the day, I think there's a lot that conservatives and liberals both agree about what the problem is, but don't agree as to what the solution to that problem is, if that makes any sense. And at the end of the day, I think we've tried, the proof is in the pudding. We all you have to do is look around the nation and look at where those policies have been implemented and the chaos that has come from that. And even right here in Norman, we have stuff going on with homelessness and that we didn't have 5 years ago, even, before some of these policies were implemented. And it's an unfortunate that we got to this point, but hopefully I think people are starting to see it more and starting to realize, hey, we're being billed something here that is not what we signed up for. Yeah. So I completely agree. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this and appreciate
Oh,
talking
Matt,
to you.
it was honestly, it was way more than I even expected.
Well, I'm sorry.
You
I hope I didn't go
overshot your
overboard.
mark. It was phenomenal. So
Okay.
thank you so much for being on with us today, really, truly. And I will get all that stuff taken care of this afternoon so that we can get all of this information out so that people can find it and click on the links themselves. And
Awesome.
I am going to go ahead and edit the video down. So we've got 2 separate ones and people have, yeah, I think a little better chance of watching both of them if we do that. So
Yeah, for sure.
again, thank you so much, Matt. And we hope to call on you again another time, as a matter of fact.
Definitely.
Sure.
You know,
I got a new baby coming, so I'm going to be busy for a bit with that. But after
they take care of themselves.
Right. Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Matt. And we do hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for everything you did for us today.
Sure. Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
God bless. Thanks. Well, that was the longest video I think we've ever done for a rope report, but it was so phenomenal. Do what?
It's necessary. I said it's necessary.
Yeah. So I just hope that people will really pay attention to what he said and pay attention. I don't know. All right. Well, I know you need to run on for the day.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Mr. Gonde, for your time as usual. And thank you so much for everybody tuning in. And we really appreciate those of you who hung with us. And we will have, I will get a couple of separate videos done. So you've got a little, you're able to watch them in a little bit shorter of a time frame. But thank you again for being with us today. And on Friday, we'll have our rope regular, Sherry Conley, Representative Sherry Conley. She's going to be talking about community schools. And we've been very against that and tried to stop a bill and did get it stopped last year. Not this year, but last year. And we think we're going to have a great discussion on that. You're going to want to be there. So thanks, Michael.
Yes, man. Well, I'm glad we had Matt on here. I mean, and honestly, in the first part of that podcast, we need to seriously go after creating that ethics commission or ethics board at the State Department of Education. I mean, that needs to be kind of a major goal for all of us in the next year or so, is getting legislation or whatever, however it's going to happen. That needs to happen.
Yeah. We might even bring that up to Sherry on Friday.
Yeah.
Talk to her about that. But yeah, I definitely think, and we need to write a letter but I also agree with Carl. If we're going to do that, we're going to have to be very specific about, what these ethics violations are, so that we're not ending up, setting a trap that we ourselves get caught in, if you want to put it like that. So, all right. Well, Michael, I will see you again on Friday. You have a wonderful day, everybody else.